Last month saw the return of Thunderblight. I should explain that every so often one of the quote higher-up members of the Bronalysis community will engage in a ludicrously self-indulgent group collab, often involving an alter ego monologuing about how I'm the darker side of your personality that resents your friend's success and wants to see them burn, and I represent the internal struggle within your mind. You get the idea. It's got to the point now where I have enough inner struggles of my own without having to listen to someone else pretentiously dramatize theirs and pretend like the whole internet should care for some reason. So like many, I choose to ignore them. But that's where Leo Convoy Reviews comes in. A guy obsessed with Thundercats who, among other things, has been bugging the likes of Dr. Wolf, Silverquill and the rest of them to address the growing paedophile issue. More on that later. Remember we talked about how sometimes you need a slap around the face? Well, Leo Convoy will administer that slap, and because of that you might not necessarily want him there all the time, but you need him. He was the one who got Vida and I to the negotiating table, and while we haven't exactly resolved our differences, I mean the problems I have with Vida are pretty fundamental, we were able to have a calm, reasonable conversation and understand each other a little more. Anyway, the point of all this is that when Leo started pestering me to cover the revenge of self-indulgence, I was more than happy to step up and do the honours by tearing into this piece of garbage a new one. Part 1 begins with Dr. Wolf assisting Lightning Bliss with reorganising her alicorn dimension. Now don't worry, we'll be getting into the negatives soon enough, but this is actually a good opening as far as establishing what will become the core themes of the narrative. Both Bliss's attempts at coordinating her magic and the location tie neatly into her conflicts and challenge adapting to her abilities as an alicorn.
Just trying to accept being an alicorn, I suppose. And what better way to do it than be in a dimension we're created in, right?
It's this conflict which forms the basis of the aforementioned inner struggle represented by Thunderblight, her alter ego. Oh look, it's a mysterious book related to the original saga. I wonder what's going to happen. This does spark a poignant monologue from Bliss regarding her strong feelings about her other persona, which adds emotional weight when the transformation inevitably comes. It's just a shame it's immediately dampened by one of Dr. Wolf's lectures.
I'm so ashamed of it to this day.
Miss Bliss, please, no tears. I understand that it is a personality you never wanted any of us to see, but it is a part of who you are.
Yeah, I know this is part of his character and it's what he does, hence I don't watch his channel, but there is a reason why having someone explain how a character works thematically does not make for good storytelling. Anyone who studies writing for 5 minutes knows that subtext and show don't tell are two key aspects of dramatic dialogue.
Did you not give the same respect to Princess Celestia or Luna?
They are of royalty, Miss Blight. Not even Lightning Bliss embraced such a title. She found it too high and mighty. It was always like her to be grounded and...
Grounded!
Imagine how much more impactful this would be if the line was simply, Lightning Bliss would never embrace such a title, without the implications being patronizingly spelt out for us. As soon as Thunderblight appears, the saga goes into an identity crisis. Now, of course, a hammy villain can be good fun, and Thunderblight is certainly that, with her cheesy monologues and her evil laugh, but you've got to have a good control of tone, and the way this is executed gives you whiplash. One moment we're watching a Shrek meme, the next, oh wait, no, we're doing serious drama now. There were times I wished the saga would just embrace its silliness and not try to take itself so seriously. Some moments did hint at going in that direction, like this scene in part 3.
I swear, if you have harmed Lightning in any way, I'll have
me once!
Seriously? We're doing this again? How many times are we gonna bring these alter egos back? It's like a horror movie franchise.
But then it's straight back into the pretentious, emotionally charged monologues.
She not only helped me with my elaborate proposal to Midnight, but she's filled my life with so much color and cheerfulness. None of us would be the same without her.
See, this is what I mean when I talk about self-indulgence. Why should anyone care about this stuff? Think about it, really. Are you making this for yourselves or for a wider audience? At best, it comes across as naive writing. At worst, it's an obnoxious form of egotism. But then we are dealing with the kind of people who think recording themselves play D&D makes for engaging content. Every time a tiny little startup group that's barely produced anything writes pages and pages of backstory on the Rift Wiki, all I can think is, how can I be harsh on them when the so-called big players in the analysis community, who should know better, are routinely indulging in the exact same type of behaviour? You are very minor, small-time internet celebrities, if that, so get over yourselves.
You saw her talents first before everybody else. You even gave her her first big break by collabing with you on your channel.
Also, doesn't this line kind of reinforce the same gatekeeper mentality, you know, that gave Toon Critics so much power in the first place, which you talked about in that podcast that really should have been put out on a bigger platform instead of an obscure drama channel? On the subject of Toon...
Nothing but gray? That weird voice? The cause of cartoon...
You really went there, didn't you? When I hear people talk about bronies being mentally deficient in some way, these are the moments when I begin to see where they are coming from. Like, is this how real life works in the minds of these individuals? I can see it now, Cartoon Saga Part 3. I'm sorry, Toon. We can't associate with this anymore. We're giving you 24 hours to turn yourself in, and if you don't, we'll blast you with our friendship lasers. Still waiting for one video, one acknowledgement of Performance Major or Dusky novel, by the way. I'm not going mad here. I mean, the VA community are taking this seriously. If you think myself or Leo Convoy are just doing it for the drama or whatever, then why not follow Scribbler's example? Anyway, at danger of getting sidetracked here, let's return to the review. So Thunderblight has been going around discording Bliss's friends by removing key personality traits, and I'm sorry, seeing Golden Fox hating Keyframe after all his love is absorbed is funny. It just is. Dr. Wolf has to be my favourite, though. Can you just stay like this forever, please? There's a short moment of calm before the thunderstorm, so to speak, in each part, that does provide some much-needed juxtaposition and context for the havoc and destruction which Blight causes in her path. It also gives us Robin and Emerald Comet attempting to block her entry with a pile of furniture which is just gold. Why is it these two characters in particular are so sharply written? Lightning Bliss's husband, Sub-Zero, tries to protect her friends but cannot harm Thunderblight. His arc didn't really go anywhere, did it? Which begs the question, what is he even doing here? He can't read lines in a way that sounds remotely natural, that's for sure.
Lissy, you did it! You did it, you wonderful pony, you! I knew you could!
You know, just because he's your husband doesn't mean he had to be included in this, right? But I guess it ties back to that self-indulgence we discussed before. Just when all hope is lost, it seems, Aeon of Dreams appears, and, well...
Did you just deflect her attack with your butt?
Nicely done, Master.
Huh? What? What are you?
A massively overpowered plot contrivance? Credit where it's due, Aeon is entertaining in this scene, but you can't get around the fact it is a huge deus machina. Okay, it's not Aeon who actually saves the day, technically. Bliss still has to defeat her alter ego, but only after she has been distracted and weakened by Aeon. At least that's the only logical way I can explain how she suddenly has the power to do it. At best, it comes off as a confused and slightly unsatisfactory ending. Finally, we discover this saga was all really to give Lightning Bliss a new background and theme. Great, well now perhaps you can focus on producing more proper content for your channel. The animation is not especially brilliant, but really no worse than I'd expect for a half-assed production like this. The tone is all over the place, the story can't settle on what it wants to be. A goofy parody, a serious drama, an egotistical circle jerk. The reference to cartoons is very poorly judged to top it off. In conclusion...
Oh, so this was just a way to introduce your new design and background and intro, wasn't it? You know, you could have done it in another way that wouldn't have put the world in a metaphorical black and white hell state.
2 sentences, that's all you needed. This is Midnight Chimes, waiting for the last train back to Ponyville.
Well, folks, here we are. I always thought that replying to review videos would be left to my friend Midnight Chimes, but I couldn't hold myself back this time. This review by Lightning Bliss was just so terrible and shallow that it warranted a reply to correct the many egregious errors made by its creator. Now, I've personally met Lightning Bliss at BronyCon 2017, so of course I'm slightly familiar with her work already, and I'm well aware of her status in the fandom as one of the top Brony analysts. Lately, however, I've been catching more and more of her reviews, and I've begun to question just why she's considered one of the best. Her 2-4-6 grade and Once Upon a Zeppelin reviews were both slogs to sit through, what with her blowing key elements of both episodes out of proportion and simply taking them way too seriously, but her Meltdown review was bafflingly horrible. Now, if you are a longtime viewer of mine, you'll know how much I praised Meltdown back in 2018 when it aired, considering it one of the best Spike episodes of the show for how incredibly respectful and delicate it was, with the subject matter of puberty for the target audience. Lightning Bliss, however, glosses over that and practically the entire point of the episode for pedantic reasons in what seems to be an attempt to come off as morally superior. Not to mention, she's nitpicky as all hell with how the episode handled the fleshing out of dragon culture. How badly did she miss the mark with this objectively well-done episode? Well, I'll try to make her review more tolerable with my reply, so sit back and enjoy. I wonder how much of this I can show before Hasbro gives me a copyright claim. Meh, better to be safe than sorry, I suppose. Okay, now that I have a filter prepared for the MLP clips, my main problem with this review, and Lightning Bliss's style of reviewing in general, is she appears to come off as someone who talks down to her audience. I mean, the way she just spells out who Pee-wee is, as if no one who's watching has even heard of him, really has an air of condescension to it, despite Lightning Bliss trying to come off as cheerful and friendly. Just listen.
I've been meaning to visit Pee-wee.
Pee-wee? Wow, what a callback to Dragon Quest. As in Pee-wee the Phoenix chick Spike rescued from Garble and the other Teen Dragons?
No, of course it's not that Pee-wee. Even though we got to see Spike raising the Phoenix chick and then giving him back to his parents through a photo montage and just for sidekicks, Spike is clearly referencing the episode where Pee-wee Herman taught the main six about the dangers of cocaine. Remember that riveting story?
This is crack. Rock cocaine.
In all seriousness, would it have been so bad to just say something like, "Wow, Pee-wee, I haven't heard anything about him since what, season 3? It still accomplishes the same goal of sounding surprised and also reminds the audience of how long it's been since the character in question has been mentioned without coming off as condescending towards the intelligence of the audience. Unfortunately, this flows into another problem I have with just the beginning of the review. I personally loathe reviewers who ask rhetorical and obvious questions to start off their videos. Unless you're doing it to be cynical and sarcastic for a joke because the outcome of the episode is completely obvious, doing this is just really lazy and irritating to listen to. The majority of your audience will have likely seen the very episode or movie you're reviewing, so they'll already know how the story plays out from the beginning to the end, making this part of the review almost pointless. Questions like,
Granted, I'm not sure what's to come of this other than a few things. Is Spike going to get taller? Maybe his voice will drop. Will he get wings? No, he'd never get wings. Why would he?
serve absolutely no purpose. We already know Spike gets his wings, especially since Meltdown was heavily talked about because it was leaked before Season 8 even started, and it contained one of the biggest changes to Spike overall. Of course, people are already going to know, even if the episode wasn't leaked. What makes this worse is this review was posted nearly a year after the episode officially aired, which just adds to the redundancy of asking what the outcome will be. Asking how well Spike's puberty turned out through the episode is one thing, but asking just what will become of it is simply a waste of time. However, this isn't even the worst part. Lightning Bliss, for some reason, goes on a tangent about Spike's character from the very first iteration of My Little Pony. Just why? This is, again, a complete waste of time, and we're already 2 minutes into an 11-minute review. She goes on to say that the creators for G1 didn't give him wings because, well, I don't really care. Meltdown is a G4 episode. G1 can be taken out of this equation because it has nothing to do at all with the episode she's talking about. It's nothing more than padding to remind her audience that she's been a fan since the 80s and trying to show off, Look how much MLP knowledge I have. Aren't I oh so smart? Also, since this is an entirely different generation from G1, the reference makes even less sense. There's legitimately no good reason to not give Spike wings at all in G4's canon. It's a completely different time from G1, and the context for Friendship is Magic is massively different. Also, why are you criticizing a decision made for G1 in a review for a G4 episode? I'm here to listen to you talk about Meltdown, not listen to you blether on about a decision from your childhood you found stupid. After about 40 seconds wasted from that pointless tangent, Lightning Bliss attempts to address what she believes to be plot holes in Meltdown's story. Oh boy, this is gonna be fun.
But enough of that, we got a plot host to address like...
Phoenixes aren't meant to be domesticated. Even in the wild, they like to keep to themselves.
Oh yes, I guess someone forgot to tell Celestia about that with her pet.
Yeah, this isn't a plot hole. See, the key word here is Spike says meant, as in they weren't bred at all to be pets like dogs and cats, but that doesn't mean one could never be a pet. Since we don't have much to go off of from Celestia's backstory with her Phoenix pet, it's safe to say she's an exception. For all we know, Celestia could have found Philomena alone and injured with no other Phoenixes around to help her, so Celestia decided to take her in and Philomena decided to stay with her. Now, of course, this is just speculation, so I won't say this is officially what happened, but Celestia owning Philomena as a pet doesn't really contradict anything previously established in the show, nor does it contradict what Spike said. I mean, wolves aren't meant to be domesticated, but there are cases of people taking in injured wolf pups, nursing them back to health, and the pups decide to stay with the humans because they formed a strong bond. Heck, I live in Alaska, and there are cases of people who have had moose as pets. Just because an animal is not meant to be domesticated does not mean it can't be. I wouldn't recommend owning a wolf for a pet myself, but that's beside the point. And, oh by the way, Celestia is one of the most powerful creatures in Equestria. Having a phoenix as a pet should be a walk in the park for her. Not to mention, even if phoenixes do like to keep to themselves, it's still possible Philomena is completely comfortable around Celestia and other ponies due to being her pet for so long. And just look at Pee-wee. Spike still took care of him when he was a chick, and he's comfortable and even excited to see Spike in this very episode.
There's Pee-wee's parents.
Wasn't their nest originally located in the Dragonlands?
No. No, it wasn't. Are you sure you've watched Dragon Quest before? Their nest that Garble and his goons tried to pressure Spike into attacking was in a forest that happened to be along the path that the dragons took for their migration. It wasn't in the Dragonlands at all because we never saw the Dragonlands before Gauntlet of Fire. Also, the last time we saw Pee-wee's parents, at least before we saw the pictures of Spike returning him to them, was them flying off and away from Garble and his goons. It's logically possible that Pee-wee's parents relocated to another forest since their last home was attacked by dragons. If your home is being attacked by massive and dangerous predators, it only makes sense to pack up and leave and find a new safe spot to raise your phoenix babies. Come on, this isn't hard to think of.
The feathers of that bird can affect Pony's ears. It's a magic ailment I've treated for years.
Okay, how many plot holes are going to be made in this episode? Well, let's try to focus on the positives at least.
3. You haven't correctly identified one yet. This one isn't a plot hole either. Again, listen for key words when someone is speaking, Lightning Bliss. Zecora said, can affect Pony's ears. That doesn't mean automatically that every pony that encounters a phoenix will have a hard time hearing. Calling back to Celestia, it's possible that owning Philomena for a long time has made her ears immune to going deaf from the feathers. She has her own ailment for it like Zecora, or it simply means it doesn't have the same effect on her ears that it does to other ponies' ears. Not to mention, Twilight and Fluttershy were not affected in Bird in the Hoof because Philomena was going through a molt of her own. Lightning Bliss, I'm saying this as a fellow analyst. Please look up what a plot hole is before trying to point them out. The 3 you've just tried to tackle are not plot holes at all. They just require you to think about what the show's presented as world building in the past. A plot hole is something like the White Room in Roller Coaster of Friendship. Why was Vignette's phone connected to that particular room? Why could none of the characters hear the screaming people and rides despite being in the middle of the theme park? Does that mean the room is soundproof? Well, if so, then at the same time, how could AJ hear Sidetwi's voice in the room from the outside, but none of the characters inside could hear AJ and Rarity? See? Those are plot holes because they make absolutely no sense in the context of the special. There was no good explanation given for why this room in particular was so absurdly written. It was intentionally written this way so the story could still take place. Or else if any of these were addressed, the characters could have gotten out well before the special ended and therefore ruined the story. Or just take a look at it isn't the main thing about you. Twilight and Starlight telling Rarity that they can't just create hair with magic is a plot hole because it contradicts the growing magic Twilight was practicing in Season 1 where she gave Spike a mustache. None of these so-called plot holes you've brought up are even close to being plot holes. Whew, that took a lot out of me to explain. Lightning Bliss then follows up the plot hole section with some positives she found with Meltdown. This is honestly the least aggravating part of the review because it's the most subjective portion, so there's really not too much to criticize. Except for her wording here.
I like how Twilight, despite having her concerns about Spike's sudden comeuppance, but still keep true to her sister-like stature.
What? Spike's comeuppance? Do you know what the word comeuppance means? You literally just said that Spike deserves to be going through his puberty and being scared, confused, and miserable with it. I mean, what was wrong with just saying puberty or sudden bodily changes? I swear, this feels like one of those moments where someone is trying to use a big word to come off as more smart or sophisticated, but they truly have no clue what it actually means. Anyway, the rest of what she says here is honestly just a head-scratcher.
She was concerned and made suggestions of what Spike could do about his condition, but even she knew he couldn't stay in the castle with his random spurts of fire indigestion. I mean, fire in a castle? Let alone a school with children? That's dangerous! Good on you, Twilight, for thinking about safety.
I find this to just be a really bizarre thing to highlight and praise. You're praising a character for having a functioning brain, pretty much. Oh no, fire's dangerous, so of course anyone with common sense would remove said fire hazards around them for their safety and the safety of others. Also, Twilight showing care for Spike is something she's done in many other episodes. Plus, we knew she was always like a big sister to Spike anyway. What Twilight does here isn't anything that special in the way she showed care for his safety. Remember how she consoled Spike after Sombra's evil magic made him think she was throwing him out of her life? Or heck, since you're so hung up on the callbacks to Dragon Quest, remember how she, Rarity, and Rainbow Dash risked their own necks following him on the migration path to make sure he wouldn't get hurt? That scenario is far more praiseworthy than just telling him to take the day off from being her assistant. One last thing. This section also doesn't really give the audience a lot to chew on because Lightning Bliss simply retells the synopsis of the scene and says it's good. Simply retelling the plot and saying this was good or this was bad isn't really an analysis. Speaking of that, the same problem crops up when Lightning Bliss makes the comparison of Spike's molt to humans going through puberty. Again, I'll be honest, nothing here Lightning Bliss says is technically wrong or even bad. It's more of a pet peeve of my own where certain reviewers just go pretty much skin deep with their points before moving on to the next part of their review, which just kind of leaves me unsatisfied because very little was actually said.
The sudden changes for young kids or teens can be scary and not make much sense to us, and they can come out of nowhere, and that's what I admire about Spike's situation. It felt believable and downright uncomfortable to have to sit through, but the episode lowers that problem by offering us opportunities of humor with the shenanigans of what his condition does to him.
The puberty connection is just given the most bland explanation that it comes off as boring. I think a better and more interesting interpretation would be like, despite going through all the examples most kids will go through when they enter the puberty stage of their lives, the episode never does this at Spike's expense. The writers juxtapose his stress and anxiety over his bodily changes with comedy so kids watching don't become too fearful of their own upcoming puberty. The jokes provided are ones that poke fun at the situation and not the character. We're not shown any of the other characters making fun of Spike at all, just them reacting in a puzzled way to his strange behavior. It's never put in the minds of the audience that they'll be made fun of. Sure, there are jerks out there who might poke fun. However, the episode still approaches Spike's situation with the utmost care and respect and shows their target audience that, sure, this can be a very scary time, but it's a natural thing that they not only will go through, but overcome. See, isn't that much more interesting to listen to instead of just going through what the episode did for Spike? The problem here is Lightning Bliss doesn't have an interesting spin on what's happening, so basically watching the episode and paying attention will give you the same context whether or not you watch Lightning Bliss's review. To make a long story short, I'm not learning anything new or interesting about the episode or having it presented to me in a new light to look upon differently. I've seen the episode, so this is basically having someone giving me the Cliff Notes version of the episode. Okay, so next we have Lightning Bliss gushing about how Smolder helped Spike by explaining to him that his situation is something called the Molt. And that's pretty much it. She basically just says Smolder comes in to help explain to Spike what exactly is plaguing him at the moment since she's seen this before. Probably not 11 times, though.
It's even more relieving once Smolder comes into the picture and explains to Spike what he's going through is called the Molt. Finally, more dragon facts for us viewers to learn and understand. I especially love this moment even more when they touch back on how Spike grew from his greed on in Season 2, which was induced from Dragon's thirst for treasure, to which Smolder explains that's not considered a normal part of dragon life cycle. So many callbacks and explanations tied in. Thank you, episode!
However, the problem is this is just a scene synopsis with Lightning Bliss ending it by praising it for being a callback to the greed incident in Season 2. Nothing about how unique of a spin Smolder puts on it with her sassy personality, which would be another example of how the episode makes light of the situation and not Spike's feelings or character. No mention of how Spike's fears of growing up too quick in his eyes perfectly mirrors the fears most preteens go through when puberty first strikes. It's just, Smolder explains Spike's situation to him and we get another callback to Season 2. Amazing! Look, I'm a sucker for continuity as well, but there's much more to this episode than these, Lightning Bliss. Stopping your review to say, OMG, what a great callback, several times really disrupts the flow and grinds it to a halt. You could have just saved these for its own section at the end of the review or around the beginning and that would have been just fine. But sprinkling them out like this really hurts the pacing. In addition, Lightning Bliss again repeats the same problem of just telling us exactly how a scene played out and saying, I liked it. I'll reiterate, I can just defer back to the episode itself and get the exact same context because this is just a plot retelling. I'm not demanding for a scene dissection the way Mahler does it for his reviews, but some dissection would at least be something to help the viewer think. I do have to admit, though, that I agree with Lightning Bliss that it was actually neat to learn that even dragons don't see what happened to Spike in Sweet Smell of Excess to be a legit form of growth. That's great world building from one simple little line. Okay, folks, I have to warn you. Up to now, I would call this review mediocre at best, and I think that would be a huge compliment to it. Unfortunately, this review is about to get much, much worse. Lightning Bliss's failed attempt at pointing out plot holes was bad, but holy crap, do her criticisms of how the dragons are written put her review right into the wall. It's here that she completely abandons the whole point of the episode being about growing up and how Spike might have to face a possible future of living alone without Twilight, just so she can come across as morally superior to how the dragons are presented in G4. It's so shallow and so incredibly nitpicky that it feels like Lightning Bliss forced herself to find something bad to say about the dragons.
I mean, it's bad enough they have a dragon lord that can call them at a beck and call, make them fly or serve at a moment's notice.
Okay, why is this bad? So they have a ruler that can summon them at a moment's notice. I fail to see why this is a bad thing. Dragons aren't the kindest creatures around, so having a ruler that can order them to appear before him or her whenever they want to feels exactly like a ruler the dragons would have. And, going back through previous dragon episodes, it doesn't contradict anything that came before, so this, again, comes off as pretentious and nitpicky. There isn't much being said here except, dragons bad, but without Lightning Bliss explaining why. When a leader, especially a dictator, wants something from their citizens or subjects, they want it then and now. Like Darth Vader demanding an update on the Empire's chase of the Millennium Falcon in The Empire Strikes Back. Would Lightning Bliss say, it's bad that the Empire has a leader who can just appear on any random screen and demand an update from his followers? Yet it still gets worse from here, folks.
But to abandon their young at their most vulnerable because they smell and attract other predators?
Going through puberty isn't their most vulnerable. When they're hatchlings fresh from their eggs is when they would be at their most vulnerable state. You know, because they're newborns. And to add to that, at least dragons raised by other dragons would have some sort of idea of how to defend themselves with fire, claws, and teeth by the time they reach puberty, so they're not that vulnerable.
I get it, one shouldn't judge others by their culture differences, but this is flat-out child abandonment here. Dragons are not.
Yet, you're judging them. Disregarding that hypocrisy, Lightning Bliss, they are dragons. Yeah, I know you threw in that whole dragon or not line to try and shake yourself of responsibility from this non-point, but I'm not letting it go. Dragons are not ponies. They are also not buffalo, zebras, yaks, griffins, or hippogriffs. Ponies do not know that much about dragon culture. Remember that having that good relationship with Ember was the best shot that Equestria had to bridge a friendship between ponies and dragons so that they could both learn about one another. In turn, we the audience don't know much about them either, only what's been presented in the show. All we've seen is how crude, loud, violent, greedy, and selfish dragons are. Ember and Smolder have been exceptions since they're trying to help build a relationship with ponies, but the majority of dragons shown have had those negative traits about them each and every time we've seen them. Heck, I'll even throw Dragon Lord Torch a bone for having a sense of honor by stepping down as Dragon Lord when it was time for him to, despite still being loud, crude, and demanding. So, while kicking out a child just starting puberty sounds bad on its own, the context of how the show has portrayed dragons before perfectly aligns with this notion that Smolder brings up. Yeah, I can totally see a dragon couple kicking out a child when they start going through puberty because, according to Smolder's reaction, it would become hard to deal with constantly being around someone or something that smelled that bad. Pinky actually gives the audience an idea of how exactly Spike smells. Not to mention, dealing with constant predatory attacks would eventually wear down even the most fierce dragons.
Smolder biologically states that they are simply built that way and it's just normal stage in a dragon life. I would accept this fact and no problem if dragons weren't sentient, though. For example, it's been scientifically proven that some animals will abandon their young if they feel they cannot survive on normal circumstances.
You're comparing apples to oranges here, Lightning Bliss. You're bringing up a scenario in which an animal's young becomes unable to survive or shows too many signs of weakness. This is totally not the same thing as going through puberty. Say, for example, a baby moose breaks its leg in the wild. This means its life is over and the mom can't do a thing about it, so it leaves the baby to die in search of a new mate, or patiently await the next mating season. An animal doing this is not even in the same ballpark as dragons kicking out their young when they start to molt. It simply means the younger dragons are taking their next step into adulthood by hitting the ground running and learning to fend for themselves. You know, like Smolder explicitly stated.
I mean, I love my brother and all, but one whiff and I was all, see ya!
Basically, it's the dragon equivalent to humans turning 18, not them showing signs of weakness to the point their parents can't help them. Also, bringing in real-life animal scenarios compared to fantasy creatures to make your point? Come on, that would be like me criticizing the Cars movies because they didn't follow NASCAR's rules and regulations. It's not a good comparison.
But in the show, dragons are clearly displayed as intelligent beings with a culture and government system. So, biologically claiming they can up and abandon their children sounds despicable to me, as well as downright lazy.
Oh, geez. The dragons may have somewhat of a governmental system, more closely resembling that of a loose dictatorship since there is one dragon lord who calls the shots because they hold the Bloodstone Scepter. However, if we look at dragons in Dragon Quest as well as throughout Gauntlet of Fire, it appears that, unless specifically called by the Dragon Lord, the dragons are free to do whatever they want. And culture? You mean being loud and obnoxious as well as stealing gold and gems and then hiding them away from others due to biological greed? That culture? When you boil the dragons down, they do not have the culture nor system of government that Lightning Bliss is trying to attach them to. They have the most basic form of government and culture you could have and rely mostly on survival of the fittest, which is backed up by Dragon Lord Torch caring more about the size and strength of the next Dragon Lord rather than intelligence or empathy. From what we have been shown of the dragons up to this point in the show, them kicking out their young when they begin to molt falls completely in line with how they've been written before. Again, they're crude and obnoxious, so I have no issue with the show telling us that they will kick their children out once the molt begins.
One large adult dragon would be more than enough to take on predators that would be attracted to the scent of their maturing young with relative ease. Hydras? Rocks? The previous Dragon Lord was double the size of the Hydra, easily.
So, just because an adult dragon could take on a hydra or a rock with relative ease doesn't mean they're going to. Do you think dragons would enjoy having to constantly fight off hordes of hydras and rocks and other predators on a daily or weekly basis because of their own kind turning their area into a predatory hotspot? You're also trying to give dragons a sense of empathy and selflessness, which, as we've seen so far, only very few dragons contain. Sure, dragon parents might care for their newborns in a very protective way, possibly like the T-Rex parents from the Lost World Jurassic Park, but once that biological clock starts ticking and Junior starts scratching and smelling up the joint, that's just a sign for the parents to kick them out and let them fend for themselves. And if you still have a problem with that, I'll reiterate, they're not ponies. They're not really that big on caring for the well-being of others. If that smelly, scratchy, younger dragon becomes an inconvenience, such as predators constantly targeting your home, I can easily buy the parents realizing, oh crap, we're in danger, and deciding to remove the reason for that danger attacking them. Remember, dragons have a huge issue with selfishness and greed.
If dragons are going to represent a system where it's okay to use biological reasons to abandon their children at a moment's notice of puberty, then I find it hard to be sympathetic to the characters like Smolder or even Ember. Sure, now they are making steps to improve their kind by learning about friendship, but the fact that these traditions are still happening amongst dragons really disturbs me.
You do understand that this is all still completely new to dragons, right? What, do you think that just because Ember is friends with Spike and that Smolder is attending Twilight School of Friendship, the dragons will do a complete 180 on this right away? If the dragons ever stop doing this, and I don't see how since it's a biological thing as the show has stated, that's going to take several years to become the new norm for them. If a Formula 1 driver decided to take to NASCAR, would you demand from them, why haven't you won a race yet? You've been through several already. No, changes like that take time to get adjusted to. Besides, there's a difference between following a biological urge and following a tradition. A biological urge to start a family and pass on your genetics or bloodline isn't the same as celebrating a holiday every year now, is it?
Imagine if all the ponies in Equestria thought this way. They'd more likely abandon their young immediately upon discovering they are unicorns. Have you seen what the Cake Twins have done? Young magical ponies are flat out dangerous.
Except ponies don't think this way and have been shown to be very serious about raising and caring for their young throughout the show's run. So, this point is really poor and really moot. I get Lightning Bliss is trying to get us to understand how offended she is that the dragons are being portrayed as dragons, but it doesn't work when they are being written in a way that perfectly falls in line with their previous portrayals. And I mean, yeah, sure, young Pegasus and young unicorn ponies are dangerous, but with pony culture, there are books that ponies like the Cakes could sift through in order to help them better understand and combat magical outbursts. Not to mention, friends who are Pegasi and unicorns that they could ask for help, i.e., ponies have several avenues in which to overcome a hurdle like that, whereas with dragons, their only instinct is about self-survival, which just means kicking out their kids when the molt hits. Also, she's comparing newborns to creatures that already have at least a decade of life experience to them, as I mentioned earlier, who already have an idea of how to defend themselves. Her example of abandoning newborn unicorns is extremely poor because, in her argument, just tossing out baby ponies simply because they're unicorns would probably cause the unicorns to eventually go extinct because they wouldn't have the decade of life experience to fend for themselves, and they would all die well before being able to breed. In turn, this would actually eliminate the problem altogether because then only Earth ponies and Pegasi would be the dominant pony races, with Alicorns still being an extremely rare breed. In fact, Lightning Bliss's example actually makes the ponies out to be worse than the dragons because they'd be abandoning literal babies while the dragons would still wait for their children to hit puberty before kicking them out. Again, giving them at least some idea of how to fend for themselves. What the hell? Again? How did you get in this time?
Oh, come on, Lefty, you said it yourself, response videos are usually my area, and when I saw you were doing one, I just couldn't resist barging in.
I thought I would have to say that at least 3 times for you to show up.
Well, ignoring that, my senses were tingling, and I've got to answer that call. I think what it comes down to here is that Lightning Bliss seems to, in her mind, equate flaws in the dragon culture with flaws in the show. It's a weird conflation of reality and fiction, which I actually see a lot in uncritical thinking people, where they view characters or events of a work of fiction as though they are real, rather than analysing their value as products of an author's creation within a specific context. In other words, yes, the dragon culture may be toxic, but we're not reviewing the dragon culture here. We are reviewing the show My Little Pony, within which the dragon culture exists, and merely portraying something toxic on its own is not necessarily a bad thing. It's all about the presentation. As Lefty already pointed out, the dragon lore introduced here is totally consistent with the way dragons have been portrayed in the show up until this point, but more importantly, dragons, or dragon culture, has at no point been framed in a positive light. The show is not trying to say, yes, it's okay to kick your children out when they hit puberty, and this is what Lightning Bliss is apparently struggling to comprehend. To be fair, she's not the first brony to struggle with this. Many have thrown a tantrum at the first hint of a character exhibiting flaws or vaguely negative personality traits, even if they are directly addressed in the very same episode. Look at 246 Great for a classic example. I don't know exactly why so many bronies do this, but it is consistent with the community's general tendency to get disproportionately upset about trivial things, while also showing a deep socially stunted aversion to any kind of conflict, especially when the hard grown-up conversations are to be had. Lightning Bliss has shown all of these traits in the past. I still remember the occasion when she totally flipped out and lost it when confronted by someone in a Skype group we shared, so I guess it's not too surprising she would also share in this attitude. But anyway, enough of that. I've got some Doctor Who reviewers to go round about.
Oh no.
James!
Okay. Not even gonna ask. Regardless, the weird part is, Lightning Bliss then jumps to Spike, Rarity, and Zecora being pursued by a rock in the Everfree Forest. It feels really off because it sounded like from her dialogue, her point about the dragons being meanies wasn't even finished. It's just incredibly jarring that in the same sentence, she goes from talking about a hypothetical scenario with unicorns to criticizing Spike, Rarity, and Zecora dealing with a rock.
Young magical ponies are flat out dangerous. But sure enough, while Spike and Rarity are visiting Zecora, a rock creature, as Smolder described, how convenient episode, decided to swoop down to make Spike's its next meal and ends up grabbing Zecora and Rarity instead.
They're in the Everfree Forest. A dangerous creature like a rock appearing sounds totally normal for this area of Equestria that's known to have several dangerous animals roaming about. In addition, the rock is huge. Its nasal cavities will logically be huge as well, which will make the giant bird's ability to smell incredibly powerful. Plus, Spike started to smell when he was in the broom cupboard with Smolder before heading to Zecora's, which means he's been in that area of the forest for quite a bit of time. It's reasonable to assume that with the winds in the Everfree Forest, his stench wafted upwards and crossed paths with the rock's nose. And, oh by the way, Lightning Bliss conveniently skips over the part where Spike headed off to Zecora's to vent a little more about his troubles and see if she has anything that could help mask his smell. Now, see, if she had done this, then she wouldn't have been able to make her criticism about how contrived it was that one of the creatures Smolder described happened to show up to try and eat him. Now, look, I know I've been incredibly harsh on Lightning Bliss's review for this episode so far, but her following point is one I don't really have a counter for.
Twilight later shows up conveniently to help since Spike's condition is keeping him from doing much other than to run and itch.
I mean, Twilight did say she was on her way to Zecora's anyway to get cream for his scales.
Well, I was headed to Zecora's to get some cream for your scales.
Remember, it had been some time in the episode, perhaps a few hours, since Twilight had Spike leave the castle due to his fire belches. It wasn't as if she randomly appeared. However, I'll admit that it's a tad contrived that she happened to be heading to Zecora's just at the moment Spike was released from the rock's talons. Although, it is just a small contrivance that she appeared just at that moment, it's not too distracting and certainly not episode-breaking since she said she was on her way to Zecora's anyhow. Okay, that whole section was painful to sit through, but I can assure you that the worst of Lightning Bliss's review is over. However, there are still a few more terrible things to sit through. Like here, where it appears that Lightning Bliss throws a tantrum after Spike sheds his skin and comes out with wings.
You know what would have made this episode a little bit more enjoyable? If Smolder simply told Spike the moat was temporary in the first place!
Excuse me, but when did Smolder ever imply that the pimple scales, itchiness, uncontrollable bursts of fire, and toxic smell was permanent? Lightning Bliss, think. For just a second. Think about this. Smolder knows about the molt because she's A, had a brother who went through it, so she's had experience witnessing another dragon firsthand go through it, and B, she's clearly gone through it herself since she's bigger than Spike and she has wings. So, just by looking at Smolder, you should know that it's temporary. Heck, Spike never even thought that all of his symptoms of the molt were permanent. He was scared that Twilight would kick him out the entire time since the molt was explained to him. Alright folks, we're nearly there. I can see the finish line. Lightning Bliss, after screaming her head off for no good reason, rounds out her review with her final thoughts. And yes, even these, her closing arguments, have issues.
Well, Down in general isn't a terrible episode. It has several callbacks to previous episodes Spike has been involved with, has helped to strengthen his understanding of dragon culture better, and it even provided him opportunities to show off his loyalty to his friends, even when the odds were against him.
Okay, just gonna come out and say it. No, this was not a terrible episode. It's not even just an okay episode. Molt Down is an objectively fantastic episode for several reasons. Its main goal was to teach the target audience of Friendship is Magic that going through puberty will happen to everyone, and that while it can be frightening in some aspects because of bodily changes, it's a natural process that they will overcome and will not be alone in. Spike's reasons for being afraid are completely justified, not because of how sudden and embarrassing some of his symptoms are, but because the thought of suddenly growing up and counting down the days until you're an adult and are out on your own can be extremely overwhelming. Plus, learning more about dragon biology and Spike getting his wings were fantastic additions and add more interesting aspects to the dragon lore of the show. And Smolder, once again, showed why she's one of my favorite of the Student Six. While helping Spike, she did it in her own sassy, unique way that made her explanation of the molt more fun and interesting instead of making it a boring biology lecture. I can agree the jokes are good as well and only add to the enjoyment of the episode to keep it from becoming too serious and too dramatic. And oh yeah, callbacks do not count towards how good an episode is. Take Daring Doubt for example. That episode made several callbacks to earlier Daring Do episodes, and that was a trash episode. Callbacks are simply nice little cherries on top of your episode sundae.
But what takes away the higher rating for me is the fact that I learned a rather dark side to dragons, and it feels like it's given me more reason to dislike the civilization.
So, your biggest criticism of Molt Down is you learned a dark truth that reveals the crude, brutish, and selfish dragons aren't kind, caring, and warm like ponies. Oh no, episode ruined, it's too dark. Good lord, I can already see the comments telling me to stop writing Lightning Bliss for her opinion. Look, if she doesn't enjoy the episode as much as I do, that's totally fine. But reasons like this and her entirely pointless tangent on how the dragons are presented when they hit puberty are weak and desperate at best. You're sad that the dragons aren't the exact same way parental-wise like ponies are? Well, I'm sorry, but that's the way the show presented them as. And I'll reiterate, again, this is 100% consistent with past portrayals of the dragons in the show. I can easily buy that they would kick out their children the moment they begin to molt because dragons are not the nicest of creatures, nor do they particularly care about the lives and well-being of other creatures. And before someone tries to point to Ember and Smolder, those two are the exceptions. You just have to face the facts that the majority of dragons are just assholes and that it'll be some time, with the efforts from both Ember and Smolder, before dragons become nicer and more approachable to ponies as a whole. And that's okay. I'm fine with an entire civilization having to take time to progress this way. I would be extremely put off if all of them were already acting the same way Smolder does to ponies because it'd be contrived as all hell and totally unrealistic. And next, we get Lightning Bliss attempting to improve the episode with her own idea. It makes the episode completely unidentifiable.
Instead of going for this route of dragon culture, why not have it made a temporary test state for young dragons to come of age and learn to live on their own while the parents kept watch from a distance? Or better yet, have the dragons that are molting leave the nest so they can better improve by distancing themselves from their parents, allowing them to gain new perspective of their choice, and not make the culture itself look diabolical as a whole.
Because puberty isn't a test that humans go through. Like I mentioned before, the molt is essentially the equivalent to humans turning 18 and being considered a legal adult in which they can go out onto their own into the real world. Remember, every dragon that reached the molt while being raised by dragon parents would reasonably already have an idea of how to defend themselves with their fire-breathing claws and teeth. Not to mention, it completely takes away the entire point of the episode. It was to show the target audience of MLP that despite puberty having its downsides and fear factor, it's only natural and only temporary. Making it into some stupid test trivializes puberty and robs it of all the respect and care that the writers approached it with. Also, if it was just some stupid test, what would make the scale pimples, itchiness, voice cracks, fire belching, and stench go away had Spike passed? Not to mention, the focus being on how Spike allowed his fear of possibly being separated from Twilight would have been lost and made the episode completely boring.
The episode certainly wasn't one of my favorites, but I can still say I'm happy to see that Hasbro finally decided to give Spike his wings after over 3 decades of My Little Pony existence. And look at that, Hasbro. He's still a cute, adorable little dragon.
And would you look at that? Lightning Bliss reveals just how petty she truly is. And not the good kind of petty. This is an entirely different generation with vastly different showrunners and show writers. While the G1 showrunners might have been more apprehensive with their approach to Spike's character, the G4 showrunners have been shown to be more willing to try more risky things with their characters. Taking this jab at Hasbro is honestly kind of childish.
Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I would deeply appreciate the support and would love to hear from you. Keep an eye out for those rainbows. They will make you smile.
Yeah, no. I'm proud to click that thumbs down button because this review was awful. It's full of Lightning Bliss plainly reading a plot synopsis and saying, this was good and this was bad, without ever really trying to dive into why. When she did try, however, it was nothing more than her being personally offended that an entire species in My Little Pony aren't the kindest of creatures when it comes to their offspring, when, as shown in previous episodes, they're already not the kindest of creatures to begin with. Not to mention, Lightning Bliss fails to understand what an actual plot hole is despite claiming she found 3. And even though I'm a sucker for continuity nods myself, stopping your entire review just to say, holy crap, this is a continuity nod, really stilts the pace. Unless you're Silver Quill, who makes continuity nods fun. Yes, I get that reviewing something is all about giving out an opinion and all that, but when you allow your personal feelings or something to take control of your thinking and get in the way of an episode or story's objective quality, your review is honestly going to suffer. It would be like if a NASCAR fan asked me why I hated a certain race and I answered, because a driver I hate won it. That won't be very helpful to discuss a race and I would come off as a sore loser. Lightning Bliss really just comes off as amateurish at best and incredibly pretentious with her criticizing the dragons, all the while taking jabs at Hasbro for decisions different people made 30 years ago. With reviews like this, I'm really left scratching my head as to why Lightning Bliss is considered one of the best analysts in the fandom when she puts out low-quality reviews like this, 246 Great, and her Once Upon a Zeppelin reviews. Anyways, I'm gonna leave it at this. Did you like Lightning Bliss's review or not? Let me know down in the comments below, and thank you for watching. I'm Mr. Left Turn. I'll see you when I get back from the track.
I mean, her review was awful. It's still the worst review as ever. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I think I'll do a special video for you guys.